think I finally did it. Normally, if my wife is leading the singing, she says, make sure you pick songs that I know. I think I picked one that Kathy didn't know today for the very first time. But I love that one phrase. You ever ask yourself that? Jesus, why me? I love that question. Why me?
Why not?
And you know there's an answer in the scriptures. God is talking to Jacob, and he says, I have loved you because I have loved you. Can anybody hear me? Do I need this turned up? Can you hear me now? All right. So, that's just a thought. It's a thought that sticks out to me at times when I'm doing this. But as we come to this, we are in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 8, verses 22 to 25, page 732. Also, if you look in your notes there, I have included the parallel passages. And one of the significances is in the parallel passage in Mark. I'm going to reference it quite a bit. The passage in Mark is actually what the title of the sermon is, Hush, or Hush Now. And it's out of the New American Standard because that's how the New American Standard translates a part of that. And we'll get to that here in a moment. But have you ever done something, you get into something, and something just went sideways? Maybe something that you've done 100 times, and it's almost routine, and on the 101st time, something happens that you've never experienced before. Who do you call when that happens? Who do you go to? A lot of times our first response is, I'm going to call my parents. Who do we call? See, this is really what's happening here with the apostles. They're out in a boat. 7 of them, if we flipped to John chapter 21, 7 of them are fishermen. They've been on this lake their entire lives, or 15 years of their life. They know this lake. They know this lake inside and out, and something happens that they're not ready for. And that's what this passage is. So let's read the passage, and I'm going to just read it right here. One day Jesus said to the disciples, let us go over to the other side of the lake. So they got into a boat and set out, and as they sailed, he fell asleep. A squall came down on the lake, so that the boat was being swamped, and they were in great danger. The disciples went and woke him, saying, Master, Master, we're going to drown. He got up, rebuked the wind and the raging waters, and the storm subsided, and all was calm. Where is your faith? He asked his disciples. In fear and amazement, they asked one another, who is this? He commands even the winds and the water, and they obey. See, it's an interesting thing because nothing in their training has prepared them for this moment. The only thing they have to look on is 10 to 15 years of experience. And if we look at the sons of Zebedee and Peter and his brother Andrew, they had been fishermen their entire lives. Their fathers were fishermen before them. They had experience with this lake. And this storm was so bad they were panicked that they were going to die. This was outside of their normal storms. And that's significant on the Sea of Galilee. The one other thing that they had to relate to, and while I was in Denver, I was reading this as a part of my daily devotions, is Jonah chapter 1. There's a story of a storm that gets out of control and is calmed. And we're going to come back to it because the difference is so significant, which is related to their response. And we know that at least Nathanael and Philip really well versed in the scriptures. And we know that from John 1 because Philip comes over and says to Nathanael, hey, we found the one the scriptures tell us about. He's Jesus of Nazareth. And Nathanael's response is, does any good thing come out of Nazareth? Right? So we know that they know the scriptures. And then when Nathanael comes and actually talks to Jesus, he goes, oh, you are the one we've been waiting for. So we know that they know the scriptures, and we know that they know this story of Jonah, which is why I bring that up. But as we get into this, I want to cover some of this ground here. We're in this passage, we're in verse 22, and Jesus says, let's go over to the other side of the lake. They're in Galilee, And they go over to the other side of the lake to, and I'm not even sure I can pronounce the word, the region of the Gerasenes, which is on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. And we know that because that's the passage that Ron used last week. So when they got there, they came to the region of the Gerasenes. So they start on one side of the lake, they're headed to the other side of the lake. This lake really isn't that big. It's about 7 miles wide at its widest point and 13 miles long. They're in a common fishing boat. In 1986, they finally found one that was almost complete. The boat's 27 feet long, 7.5 feet wide, and the bow's about 4.5 feet high. This is the boat that they're in. Now, it sounds like a decent-sized boat, but when you stick at least 13 people in it, if we have all the apostles and Jesus, it's starting to get crowded. And they're heading across. It typically had 4 oars and a mast for a sail. These guys are used to this, and then there'd be a little rudder in the back. And this is probably the boat that they're in. And as they're sailing, he falls asleep. The Mark passage tells us he's in the stern of the boat, laying on a pad. He's comfortable. You ever been out sailing on a nice, almost calm day, because it's really hard to sail on a day that's completely calm? Almost calm day, and the sun's beating on you, and you're not responsible for actually running the sail and running the rudder? What happens? You kind of fall asleep, right? Nice soft spot in the sun, and you're just like, ah, yeah. So Jesus falls asleep as they're sailing. And then a squall comes up on the lake. It says there, they get into the boat, and a squall came down on the lake, so that the boat was in danger of being swamped. Now, there's some aspects of this lake that make it really, really prone to sudden storms. But I'm trying to figure out how to relate all of this. The Sea of Galilee is actually in a rift valley. A rift valley is basically a point where 2 plates run into each other, and they both go down a little bit. They get real deep, real sharp angles. The Sea of Galilee is 686 feet below sea level. Mount Hermon, which is about 30 miles north of the lake, which feeds the lake with most of its fresh waters, kind of the headwaters of the Jordan River, is 9,230 feet. So here's our relationship. We have mountain climate up here on the top. We have a almost subtropical moist climate down here in the bottom, and a 10,000 foot drop into a very narrow valley in 30 miles. For a relationship, that is greater than the drop between Flagstaff. Actually, it's greater than the drop between the top of Mount Humphrey and Sedona. We're talking about almost an 11,000 foot drop in 30 miles. That drops about 8,800 to 9,000 feet in 30 miles. So this drop is more sudden than that, more abrupt than going from the top of Mount Humphreys, and it's down into this canyon. And the result, you have all this dry desert air like we have here, all the way around. And then you have all this moisture coming down through the middle, this cool air coming off the mountain, and you can get some really sudden, sharp storms. The guys take off, probably a nice, calm, easy, breezy day, which is why Jesus fell asleep readily. And all of a sudden, a storm comes up. And it comes up, the Matthew passage says the waves are so big, they're being swept over the boat. Now, if we just read that's a 4.5 foot bow on that boat, these are pretty significant waves. It's a pretty sharp wave coming up. It must have even been abnormally large. And we say that because 7 of these guys are fishermen. They grew up on this lake, and they begin to panic. They're frightened. The Greek word that's used for they become afraid is actually the same word that's used to suggest cowardly. These guys are absolutely terrified. They're about to lose their life. Now, for fishermen who've spent their entire lives on this lake, to be that afraid of the water, something's going on. So they come to him, Master, Master, we're going to drown. I imagine that there's fear in their voice. Because there's only a single event in Jewish history that suggests this, and this is the story of Jonah. And if you know the story of Jonah, Jonah is a prophet. He's told by God to go to Nineveh, which would be roughly like us being asked to go preach in Tehran right now. And he's like, yeah, I don't think so. I am not going there. And he jumps in the boat and he heads the other direction off to Tarsus, which for relationship would be, you've been asked to go to Tehran in the east. Instead, I decided I'm going to go to Singapore. That's kind of the directional relationship going on here. In Jonah, storm comes up. Jonah's asleep. Notice our parallels? Jonah's asleep. Sailors come to Jonah and say, hey, what did you do to make your God so mad that this happened? Well, I'm running from God. What should we do? Well, throw me in the water. They're like, yeah, we can't do that. If your God's angry enough to cause this storm, because you're running the opposite direction, we're not going to kill his prophet. But nothing happens. They throw him in the storm. They finally throw him into the water, and the sea goes flat. So again, we have these parallels. Seasoned watermen in a storm that causes them to panic, because we're going to die. And they're coming to the prophet. And I think this is a part of why Jesus questions their faith. But let's get to that in a minute. It's interesting what happens. They're terrified. And Jesus, it says here in Luke, he rebukes the storm. And if you've ever seen this dramatized, you've seen this, and it usually uses the King James language. The King James in the Gospel of Mark says, peace, be still. You've probably seen that in a dramatization if you watched a movie about the Gospels. But the interesting thing, if you look in the New American Standard Bible, which does a literal translation, the word is hush. See, Jesus gets up, he looks at the storm and he goes, shh, knock it off. That's enough. He rebukes the storm. It's the same as if I'm standing up here and my kids are acting out and I give them the look. I'm not going, making a big deal out of it. It's just, hush, it's enough. Knock it off. You're done. Okay?
Good luck with that.
Well, there's some good luck with that. But you see, this is the creator of the universe standing up and telling his creation, shh, knock it off. Freaking people out. And see, they want to know, wait a minute, how did that happen? That's their response. Jesus asks about their faith. Look, you've seen me raise people from the dead. You've seen me heal lepers. You've seen me heal people from being sick. Where was your faith? Don't you know who I am yet? And I really think that's what this, where's your faith? The real question is. Because see, the only thing they have to relate it to is Jonah. They got that story of Jonah in their mind. Man, it's going to take getting thrown into the sea to stop this because God is on this side. And they may well be thinking this because they're going from Galilee, which is a Jewish area, into the area of the Gerasenes, which is not the Jewish area. Is this guy running away from something, just like Jonah? See, the question that they're having isn't, oh, we got the God of the universe sitting in the boat with us. It's, we got this prophet, maybe he can help us out. Which is where the question of, where's your faith, comes from. And then Jesus, instead of having to be cast into the sea, instead of something being wrong, gets up and goes, shh, knock it off. All right? That's how the NAS really translates that from Mark. Hush. And the storm goes flat. And they're like, okay, we know Jonah was a prophet. And God used him in spite of all of this. But this guy, he doesn't have to do anything except shush the storm. Just like it's a petulant child. A little child that's a little bit out of control. And he's, shh, stop it. I'm trying to do this. And that's all that goes on. They understand what this means. Who is he? Who is this that the wind and the waves obey him? They finally see this and go, wait a minute. And part of the reason is, if you remember when we looked at Jesus healing and bringing people back from the dead, that had happened before. Leprosy, prophets had healed people before from leprosy. It always took more effort because it wasn't their strength that was doing it. But in this case, the strength is sitting in the boat with them. So that power, the creator of the universe, is in the boat with them. And he just goes, shh, hush, be still. And the storm stops. That's why their reaction is so strong. Who is this? But it brings me to a few questions. As I look at this, it's, do we really know who Jesus is? I mean, when things go really, really wrong, do we know who he is? Do we think he's another one of the prophets who maybe he can help us out? He's another great guy. He's this incredible person. He told these great stories. He taught new truths. Or do we recognize him as the God of the universe? See, Colossians chapter 1, verse 16. If you look in Colossians 1:16, it tells us, by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authority, all things were created by him and for him. And if you go to John 1:3, it says that everything that has come into being was created by him. And you want to know who that is? We flip back to Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And twice, we see this both times here in the New Testament, that is attributed to Jesus. Do you know who he is? Do you really know who he is? He's the head of the body, the beginning. Colossians 1 goes on. And scriptures say, I know whom I have believed in and am persuaded he is able to keep what I've committed to him against that day. Do we really know who he is? Do we really know who we believed in? That this is God? And that when he speaks, even the winds and the waves obey? Jesus will eventually ask his apostles, who do you say that I am? See, that's the question of the universe. That's the question of faith. Who is Jesus? Who do you think he is? That's that question. The next one is, how's your faith? If you know who you believed in, if you know who Jesus is, you also know that he's always with you. Matthew 28, verse 20 says, lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the days. And Hebrews 13:5 says, I will never leave you or forsake you. Do you trust him? Or are we always worried? See, worry is an expression of a lack of faith, of the belief that God won't get it right. That the one who created the universe, the one who commands the winds and the waves, who promises to be always to be with you, won't take care of you. 1 Peter 5 gets us into that. It says, not to be anxious for anything. For God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble. What? Wait a minute, what's that mean anxiety is? It's because I'm trying to fix it. I am trying to fix it. I am the one who has a need. That's what that's about. This is God. He's the creator of the universe. How's your faith? Do you trust him to do the things he says he'll do? And the last one is, who do you turn to for help? See, the one thing the disciples got right in this whole encounter is the first thing that it says that they did is they went to Jesus and said, Master, Master. See, See, they got that part right. Because a lot of times, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to try everything in my power to get it right. I'm going to row harder. I'm going to bail faster. I'm going to call my mom. I'm going to call my best friend. Someone to bail me out. But how many times is it the last thing that we do that we finally turn to our master, to the creator of the universe, the creator of the storm, and ask him for help? Remember, he says he'll never leave you or forsake you. He's always there. Who do you turn to for the help? Do you wait till the last minute, till everything else has gone by? Or do you go, I can't handle this on my own. I'm not big enough. I can't do this on my own. That's the real question. See, this is the creator of the universe. The one that when he got up and he stood in the storm, it wasn't this big dramatic event. Mark tells us, he said, hush, be quiet, be still. That's the power he has. Who do we turn to? Do we know who he is? We have communion this morning, and I want us to think about that. Do we know who he is and believe he is able to do what he has said he